Hello, hello, welcome back. This is, podcast 109, and it is your weekly Monday motivation podcast. No more excuses. And, there's no reason to be full of them, is there? This is Sandi Ballard, your hostess, and I appreciate you being here, and appreciate you sharing. There's been a shit ton of shares lately, so I really appreciate it. Obviously, I had something good to say, or you know people that the podcast can help and should hear the words. Especially last week, I heard a lot of people say, got a lot of comments about, yes, a lot of coworkers need to hear this about the blaming. And I appreciate all the new followers I got on Twitter and Instagram, and a couple more on my Growing Forward Facebook page. So appreciate you. You are all badasses. And this is interesting. I just had a conversation with a longtime friend and colleague. We've done some work together about letting go and how hard it is sometimes. Podcast 107 was 2 weeks ago, was about that. You know, sometimes, like in her case, it's still soon about this unexpected change in her life. It wasn't a decision or anything that she made. It was an unexpected change. And sometimes it's just a little salty. But things keep popping up to remind her about this change, and the wound is still fresh, and so I didn't lecture her. But what was so interesting about this conversation, I said, to her, I was like, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I had this big aha moment. I realized I hadn't let go of something, an unexpected change that had happened in my life from like 10 freaking years ago. Yeah. And now, it's not a daily frustration or anything, but, occasionally shit pops up and I'm like, or it still has a hold on me, evidently. And so she and I were talking, and I realized as I came down to start writing my podcast that I was not practicing what I preach. 2 weeks ago, it was about letting go, drawing that line. And even though in the podcast I talked more about letting go of a decision you weren't sure if it was the right one, or negative attitude, or that, it can also be just something that's got a hold on you. And clearly this did. So I really appreciate that conversation with her. And then, obviously, in podcast 108, which was last week, it was about blame. And yeah, I had blamed these jackasses, the people who hired me, and blamed their ignorance and their fears for my loss, for my unexpected change. And, that's kind of me being a bit of a hypocrite, don't you think? So I did exactly what I had you guys do 2 weeks ago. I drew a line and said, I pointed to the line on the floor, stood up and lined up with my carpet squares and said out loud what I was leaving behind, what I was letting go of. And I turned back around and pointed forward and said out loud, this is where I'm going. And I'm sure if there were other people in my office, they would have been like, Sandi, what in the hell are you doing? And who are you talking to? But just letting you guys know, I do it too. So as I'm writing this week's podcast, I came down and this story popped in my head, and I'm like, well, that has got to be the theme, because honestly, I had no idea what I was going to talk about this week. So thank you, Jill, for the call and the ability to realize I had not done what I had not done. And you can have a little more time before I'll demand that you draw a line and let it go. But for all of you, if you didn't do that yet, or if you have other things that still have a hold on you, do that now. Draw the line, let go of that shit that you've been holding on to, stop the blame, and let's start kicking ass and taking names. And this week, we got to think about, what are you not doing? Meaning, how are you not practicing what you preach? Yeah, the whole thing, do as I say, not as I do thing, right? If you're a parent, it's probably come out of your mouth, crossed your mind. It's probably how you were raised. I know I was. So what is it? And how can you start living by your word? How will you practice what you preach? For me, when I ask you guys to do something, I'm going to make sure I do it as well. Or I am doing it. I am practicing it. Usually I do. But, like I said, it's going to be hard to be 100%, to do things 100% of the time. But this is a good exercise to start recognizing and catching yourself. I had a client recently in one of my monthly coaching groups. I asked a question of the month, and she said, "Well, how are you?" It was, I think that was the week it was the one where I said, it's spring, what's something new you're going to do? And she's like, "Well, what about you?" And I was not prepared. So, practicing what you preach. Yes, this is it, people. I'm going to do it. And you all are badasses. You're going to as well. So I look forward to hearing from you, whether you post here in the comments section, email me sballard@growingforward.biz, B-I-Z. Tell me what you busted yourself not doing, right? And if you think you're perfect, I call bullshit, and you better email me sballard@growingforward.biz and set up a session, because, no one is. And I'm going to continue the offer like I did last week, but this time the first 5 new followers on Twitter and Instagram will get that free coaching call. So look forward to hearing from you. I appreciate you following me and connecting with me and sharing. Share, because sharing's caring. All right, bitches and badasses. Let's get out there and start practicing what we preach. Have a great week. Cheers.